Hi, everybody. So just to recap what we're doing for tonight, this night's MAPS event is a Doubts About Pre-Health panel. And we wanted to discuss a multitude of the different doubts that come along with pursuing a pre-health profession and hope to ease some of those doubts that you might be having and give you some tools to assist with that. And so with that in mind, we have three panelists here with us today who are going to lead us and share some great information with us. And so if we want to just go ahead and do an introduction of each of our panelists and what they'll be talking about today, that would be great. And then after that, just so everybody has a refresher of what's going on, we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes for each of our presenters to give us information about the specific topic they'll be presenting on. And then in the last 15 minutes, we'll have time for a Q&A with all of your questions. So that is our format for the night, but I want to go ahead and start off with introducing our panelists. So Mr. Emmerich, if you'd like to start off first, and then we can go from there.
All right. I'm Jeff Emmerich. I'm the Director of Financial Services for the College of Medicine. And I'll be talking about affordability of a career in the health sciences.
Jeffrey, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Sure. So I'm also Jeff, easier to remember if there's more than one of us. I'm an M1 here at Carver, and I will be discussing some of the doubts that I had, kind of my struggles in the pre-med world, and how I overcame them to get where I'm at. So.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Holly Davis. Please call me Holly. I am a counseling psychologist by training, and I work as the clinical director and one of the associate directors at University Counseling Service here at Iowa. Oh, and I'll be talking about imposter syndrome, particularly imposter syndrome for women and folks of color.
Thank you all so much for your introductions. With that, we can go ahead and get into our individual segment portions of the evening. And then, like I said, we'll save our Q&A for the end. Is one of our panelists itching to go first for their kind of 10 to 15 minute slot?
Flexible. What does the audience want?
Audience preferences, or would we just want to nominate somebody to go first? Okay, Nikki nominates Jeffrey.
I feel like that's a little personal, but I did not prepare any PowerPoint or anything. I just kind of wanted to have a conversation with you guys. So unfortunately, you have to stare at my face. I apologize for that. I do have a little bit of blonde in my hair. I dyed my hair white for Christmas. I have a 6-year-old and he really likes it when I dress up as Santa Claus. And it unfortunately means several months of recovery. So here we are. So I kind of want to take you through my whole pre-med journey, which for me starts at about 3 years old when I already knew that I wanted to be a doctor. And talk about kind of some of the trials and struggles that I had to go through and the doubts that kind of built up from that and how I got through it. So like I said, I have known that I wanted to be a doctor since before I have memory of wanting anything. So my grandmother liked to tell the story when I was a kid that I used to tell her that I wanted to be a doctor and then I wanted to retire and then I wanted to be a cat because cats seem to have a really good life, which I seemed like I was probably a smart kid if I realized that early, right? So I still think cats have a pretty good life, but unfortunately I can't quite pull that one off. So here we are. So I grew up in a broken home, like probably a lot of you. I was in and out of foster care a lot as a kid, and didn't have a lot of educational opportunities. I was what you might call a problem child, which probably just meant that I was looking for somebody to pay attention to me, like most kids want, right? But What that meant was I didn't have a lot of educational support. So I spent most of my time in school, probably in detention, getting suspended all the way through high school. I lived with both my parents for a while, but my father passed away when I was a teenager. So I kind of had to kind of figure things out for myself. This isn't like a pity party or anything. I just kind of let you guys know that kind of set the scene for why I really didn't think that college was much of an option for me. Like on the one hand, like I knew that I wanted to be a doctor, but on the other hand, the only people that I had around me. So I know I'm very white passing because I come from a mixed race family, but I grew up with an immigrant family that had mostly worked in agriculture, fruit picking, and that kind of thing. And we work with our hands. You know, going to colleges, that's kind of for rich people. Becoming a doctor, that's for rich people. And that was a message that had been like ingrained in me with a few family members that I had. And then being in foster care, nobody around me was going to college. So like it was something that people like I was aware that people did, and I knew that I kind of wanted to do it, but I had no idea how to do it. Fortunately, right after high school, I was offered an opportunity to go to Guatemala to work with an NGO down there. And we did a couple of community outreach programs. And the director of the program sat me aside one day. He says, what are your plans when you go home? I'm still like, I don't know. Like, you know, I had this dream, like I kind of wanted to be a doctor, but I'm like, I don't know how to do that. Like that seems like too much. And he like took me out of the field. You know, I had like an actual job to be doing, right? And he's like, no, I'm going to pay you to sit down here. And he showed me how to apply to college. He showed me how to apply to FAFSA. He helped me apply to a couple of other scholarships so that I would have opportunities to further my education. I had one of my friends that I had met down there whose family kind of, when I got to college, this is like the dream scenario. This doesn't happen to everybody, but I was very grateful. They like came over to my house and realized like, oh, you don't have anything. And so they went to like the local Goodwill and helped me find like pots and pans. And they took me grocery shopping and helped me figure out how to, on a budget, how to survive at college, right? Which was very, very, very kind of them. I kind of felt like a deer in the headlights. So I get started in college and then immediately have to pull out because I got super sick. I contracted a parasite when I was in Guatemala, and it put me in bed rest for a couple of months, and so I had to pull out of school. And so I felt really defeated. I got a job. I started working to pay off some of the medical debt, and was trying to figure out how do I get back into school. It took me about a year. I started again. So at this point, I'm 23. All of my classmates are 18. I'm already feeling like I kind of missed the boat a little bit, but you kind of got to try to persevere. I know that I want to be a doctor. I know this is what I want to do. I go to school for a while longer, and then I start having some family problems. My grandmother had she'd gone into liver failure. She actually got a transplant, and it was kind of touch and go for almost a year. So I ended up having to pull out of school again. At this point, my mental health was not great, and I was starting to really, really doubt myself, my ability to finish school. And because of how I pulled out at that time to go take care of my grandmother, I had like just missed the boat on loan repayment. So like I owed the school several $1,000s that I didn't have the ability to pay before I could start school again. And so I kind of got stuck in this vicious cycle for a long time of like trying to take care of my grandmother, trying to save enough money to start school again, but also I had my own bills. So it took me several years. And it actually, I kind of gave up on it for a while. I started doing some other things. I worked in some cool political campaigns. I got to travel for a small business that I started with a friend of mine. We did some other things that were really cool. And large part because I just felt like I kind of missed the boat on being a doctor. You know, like I'm in my mid 20s, late 20s at this point. Friends that I went to high school with are already residents. You know, I just felt like I guess that's somebody else's dream. I guess I don't get to do that. And it was kind of rough for a while. And then the pandemic hit, and I saw what everybody else was doing. I had worked in healthcare at this point for a little bit as a tech, and I had some friends that were nurses, and seeing all of the work that they were able to do, and then seeing the doctors that were literally putting their lives at risk to help people during the pandemic. And it kind of reignited that fire in me that, like, I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I need to get there. I got really fortunate, scrounged up a little bit of money and paid off my debt and started school again during the pandemic. And my wife is also in medical school. So we were preparing to take the MCAT together, which made it a lot easier because I was terrified of that test, like all of you were. Fortunately, there are a lot of programs out there that help us to afford to be able to do those things, which was, I wouldn't have made it without them. I didn't even know how to find those, but I had good professors that when I expressed like I was kind of scared about the economic hurdles, they helped me figure it out. I had a good advisor, which I know not everybody does, but I was very lucky at my university to have that. And I was able to push through, and I got a pretty decent MCAT score. And then I applied. I had one of those like really aspirational, excited, like I'm gonna do this personal statements like everybody else, I guess. And then I had my first interview very early on in the cycle, like September. And the first question out of their mouth was, "So I see you withdrew several times. Why do you have all of these big gaps in your education?" And it was a fair question, and I had answers, but it always felt like I was giving an excuse. Like, at least their responses, they were always just kind of like deadpan about it, and I felt like, okay, so maybe I don't actually, maybe I haven't proven that I actually want this. Maybe I have to do something else to show them that I actually want this. And I had several interviews like that, where they could have spent the time getting to know me as a person, but all they saw was I had a lot of W's on a transcript somewhere, or I had these large gaps in my education somewhere. And it kind of crushed me. I was kind of feeling like I couldn't really do it, but fortunately Carver gave me a chance. I think Carver was the only interview that I had that nobody asked me about the W's on my transcripts, which I really appreciated. They just asked me who I was as a person. So I guess so this is going to kind of lean into Holly's conversation. She's going to do a lot better about it than I will, but like the imposter syndrome, right? Do I actually belong in this space when I'm looking around and I'm seeing these people that, I have classmates. Like in the first week of class, I had this classmate of mine who goes, "Wow, you're really mature. You must be like what, like 25?" And I was like, "Wow, you missed it by like 5 years, kid." But she's like, 21 years old, and I'm just looking at it, I'm like, man, I wish I was in medical school at 21, right? Like I have friends that I went to high school with that are attendings now, right? Like it's really weird, feeling like I belong in this space. So fortunately, I've been able to find people that have made me feel like I belong, and trying to build up that community has been a big part of making it work. Organizations like this, where you can look at people that actually look like you, right? That are on the same journey that you are, that believe that you can make it. When you say things like, "I want to be a doctor," they're like, "Of course you're going to be a doctor. Like, why wouldn't you be?" Right? Finding those types of people definitely make it possible. Just a fair warning, you might have interviews on the interview trail where you feel like they're seeing you on a piece of paper and they're judging you by stats. They're judging you by things that aren't really who you are. That happens, but there are also programs out there that don't do that. There are people that are willing to see you as a human being and willing to see the dreams that you have and are willing to support that. So I hope that all of you can understand that doubt's something that every single pre-med is going to feel, but you do belong. And I hope that you feel that you do belong, and I hope that you find people, not just some weird guy with frosted tips on the internet telling you that you have space here, and that you can make it. So those are all of my thoughts for this evening, and I hope it's helpful.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey, for sharing your story with us and helping us know that we're not alone in the doubts that we have. And for the record, I cannot see your frosted tips. So you've just been calling them out, and I don't think any of us can see them, just so you know. But I think that's a great segue. If you would like to talk next, Dr. Davis, and talk to us about imposter syndrome and how we can go about combating that.
Oh, sure. And yeah, please call me Holly, all of you. But you know, I'm a therapist first, I think, and an administrator and clinical director second. So Jeffrey, I just really appreciate hearing your story. I don't know you, but I think our narratives and our stories and our journeys are really important, and there's power in that vulnerability. And I, for the record, am old enough to remember when frosted tips were like all the rage. So that there was a time when that was all the rage. So I do have a couple of slides because I happen to have them, but I'm mostly also going to talk a little bit and certainly welcome any kind of questions or reactions too. But I want to couch a little bit of what I say in who I am too, and a little bit of my story. So I am a 38-year-old white cisgender woman. I identify as queer, and I come from a working class family. I'm originally from Michigan. And I'm a first generation college student. And my upbringing was interesting because while my family was largely blue collar and working class, there was a value of education. My family saw, particularly my mother, and I was raised primarily by a single mother, and I'm one of 4 kids, so empathy for moms. Education was seen as upward mobility, right? Education was seen as something that the older generation of my family, for many reasons, didn't access or couldn't access. And so I was really pushed that, like, it's not right. If you'll go to college, it's where you'll go to college. But I went to community college. I commuted to save money, and, you know, held 3 jobs in college. And so a lot of times wondered, right, if I belonged, and struggled to have family members and support systems that really understood what it was like to be in college. I remember talking to a friend and saying, like, can you teach me how to buy books at the bookstore? Like, I have no idea how to do this. And when I went to, so I, maybe similar to Jeffrey, knew from a young age that I wanted to probably be a helper of some sort. I thought maybe I would go to medical school, but I don't care for chemistry, so I'm glad many of you do. So I went the psychology route. So I first got my master's in counseling. And when I went to grad school then, you know, I'd been a pretty successful student. Undergrad raised my confidence over the years. So by the time I got to my master's program, I was like, okay, I can do this. And thankfully, I was in a program that was pretty supportive. It was pretty diverse. I met people from many different backgrounds. But it was when I started my PhD program that I really saw that what people talked about is imposter syndrome up close and personal, and have this very vivid memory of being in a cohort of 10. So my entire year was 10 PhD students, and we sat in this kind of conference room for a class, and we were just, you know, we had to read some stuff and then talk about it, right? And I listened to some of my cohort mates talk about their reactions to what we were assigned to read. I thought, oh my gosh, like, I didn't even notice that in the article. Like, that's so smart. That's so insightful. I didn't think of that question. Why didn't I think of that question? Like, why are you all smarter than me? Right. And so the idea of an imposter, like the phrase comes right from an obvious place of like, I am an imposter in this space, right? I don't belong in this space. And somehow I tricked them into letting me in, right? Or they don't actually realize that I'm smart. I faked it, right? I'm not smart. I'm a hard worker. That's what got me here, maybe, right? These sorts of things, right? And I see this, you know, so my partner jokes that I love school, and that's why I've never really left school. I've always worked for universities. And so as I've progressed into my job, I've worked in college mental health in a few different places. And so I see students experiencing this too. And while it is true that certainly there are young, white, straight, you know, het men or cis men who've experienced imposter syndrome too, based on their upbringing or their backgrounds or things like that. Imposter syndrome, I think, is most acutely felt by folks of color and women, right? Because these are the folks that we don't always see ourselves reflected in certain careers, right? Or if we do, that's held up as something that like really special and not like something normal. So, you know, Jeffrey ended his discussion with "you all belong here." And I would actually add to that, like, you don't just belong in those spaces, you are essential to those spaces. You are essential to providing good care, right? Because the people who are using different healthcare services also want to see themselves reflected in their providers, right? So it's important that we bring our personhood into those professional spaces too. So again, all of that kind of informs how I think about this. I am going to share my screen just briefly, because this is one of my favorite things about imposter syndrome, right? That like, no matter how accomplished you are, an expert in your field, right? Potentially you experience imposter syndrome. I'll give you a second to read it while I'm not just talking at you. Right, so the classic definition sort of imposter syndrome is really captured by some of these statements, right? Like that I mentioned, I have experienced, and probably many of you have also experienced, right? It's either that we think that we actually aren't supposed to be there, or maybe we think that we are supposed to be there, but being there isn't that big of a deal, right? That like, oh, wasn't that really that hard, right? Look at all these other people who were here, right? And so it's this frame of mind that tells us that like we're not good enough, or we're not smart enough, or not accomplished enough, right? Or deserving enough. And if we believe that about ourselves potentially, or we've been told that about ourselves, or we see it implicitly, right? And we make interpretations about that, then when we're in spaces, say with fellow students or other people, we're going to compare ourselves to them in such a way that confirms this. That's how all of our brains work. It's social comparison theory, really, right? If I think other people are more accomplished than me, prettier than me, taller than me, smarter than me, whatever it is, I will look about the world and I will find people that tell me that that's true, right? But what I don't see are all the people that maybe would disconfirm that, right? And I think there are certain types of people, right, based on our identities, again, because of representation, because of implicit and explicit bias, because of explicit discrimination, that feel this more acutely than others. So I'm going to get out of sharing my screen for just a second. So I just wanted you to have a little bit of that grounding. So imposter syndrome is actually a concept that originates to the late 1970s, actually. So researchers were starting to look at it then. Largely psychologists were looking at this. However, stupidly, as many things happened with research, they did not look at some of the key groups of people that we know now experience this the most, right? Again, especially women of color, people from lower income levels, right? Different professional backgrounds. Within my field, we even see this comparing like clinical social workers to psychologists, right? There's prestige associated with certain professional backgrounds as well. However, for a long time, and this is even true in my training, I was taught to help people cope with imposter syndrome, right? To help sort of like call bullshit, excuse my language, on that, right? And to sort of challenge that. And no doubt that can be helpful sometimes to be like, whoa, self, actually, you applied to this program, you took the MCAT, or you have the grades that you have, right? Like maybe you actually do belong to be here, right? You've done all that work and you've prepared and you've persisted. However, I'm going to turn that on its head a little bit, because that's our general understanding of imposter syndrome. But the problem with imposter syndrome, and I have a few articles I can share with y'all if you want to read them later, brief articles, that it places blame on the person, right? The idea that the pathology or the problem is in how you, the individual, are thinking about yourself, right? Versus, is the problem maybe the system where those folks are working or studying or learning? Right? And maybe there could be some of both, maybe, right? But we really have to look at the systems, right, that perpetuate imposter syndrome. Like, why is it that that individual feels imposter syndrome in that place, right? Maybe it's not the person, maybe it's the place, right? And so I never applied to medical school. I've never gone to a medical school interview. My closest parallel is graduate school. But I echo what Jeffrey said, in that finding programs and people in those programs that create systems and create learning environments that reduce this as much as possible are something to look out for as you're trying to find your place and your next steps, you know, be that medical school or residency or fellowships later on, right? So if we think about the identity piece of imposter syndrome, right? Like, again, anyone could have doubts about themselves, right? A person who holds lots of privileged identities, say white, straight, cisgender man, right, could still have uncertainties. But what we know based on research is that those doubts tend to abate, right? So as someone studies or as they engage in a workplace, right, their work and their intelligence get validated over time, right? Because we tend to exist in systems that are really good at validating certain people, maybe not so good at validating others. Yeah. And so if women and or folks of color, right, are also, and this is also true of queer and trans folks, of course, if they're experiencing that, they have fewer chances in many systems and places to have that validation over time, right? So then we see a discrepancy in how people experience or kind of recover from initial imposter syndrome. And so we really put the onus on the person experiencing it to fix it, right? And this is true of what happens in therapy, right? If I see an individual, you know, in my work as a therapist, and they tell me about imposter syndrome, right? It's very clear that the underlying assumption, even if they're not conscious of it, is that I got to fix this, right? I gotta be more confident. I got to talk to myself differently in my head. And again, maybe that can help, right? Because individual change can happen a little faster than systemic change, no doubt. And I'm often finding myself in conversations asking them, what's the environment like? What are your classmates like? What are your mentors and teachers like, right? Who gets validated? Who gets praised? Who gets opportunities, right? How hard are you working compared to your colleagues or your fellow students? Right. And again, those conversations and raising awareness doesn't necessarily result in immediate change, but it results in removing again where we think the pathology lies, right? Because imposter syndrome seems like a pretty adaptive response. Well, maybe not always adaptive, but reasonable, maybe is the word I'm searching for, response to like a toxic or invalidating environment, right? It would make sense. And so there's a lot of things, right? There's, you know, of course, undercurrents of white supremacy in almost all the systems that we exist in, right? Kind of the good old boys club, if you will, when it comes to gender, and certainly race intersects with that, right? There's not too many traditional good old boys clubs that are super open, right, to folks of color either. And that we kind of value certain kinds of leadership and communication, right? And often, again, that is unconscious or implicit. So we have to be really intentional in looking at where that's showing up in our lives. So as you are in these spaces, right, or as you're thinking about what questions you want to ask of different programs that you're looking at or different kind of next steps for you in your own journey, thinking about how does that work culture value all the ways of leading, of learning, of communicating, right? We know stereotypically, right, that assertive, usually men, usually white men, usually straight men, right, usually cis men, right, are praised for being assertive leaders, right? And that same behavior we know from folks of color and or women, right, and trans folks is not praised in the same way, right? So ask questions, observe, see how people interact when you're in these spaces to, again, assess for yourself. And also, potentially, as you move throughout your career, you may be in positions where you can enact systemic change, right? As you reach points maybe of leadership or have more kind of, what's the word I'm searching for? I know, maybe more power in the hierarchy, right? As you go along the way too. So a couple of things though, in terms of coping, I think one thing is to really check the facts, right? If you're thinking that you don't belong in a certain space or that you're not qualified or smart enough or good enough, right? Think about what a trusted other person who knows and loves you would say, right? What would they say about that, right? What would you say about a colleague with similar qualifications, right? Or a classmate with similar qualifications? When I do this with a little bit more time, I have you all do that with each other actually, right? To sort of like bring that point home of like, if you know each other well, like how would you sell that person to someone else? And how powerful is it to hear what other people see in you, right? So seek out those intentional connections for people who really see you, right? As Jeffrey mentioned, you know, sometimes allies and supports come to us naturally, and sometimes we have to go looking for them, right? And be really, really vigilant for your own internal biases, right? Particularly the likability bias. And this shows up, again, based a lot on identities. This is super acute for women, but for any kind of underrepresented groups in certain spaces, how important is it to be liked, right? And what does it mean if you're not liked, right? And so I think sometimes we act in certain ways to make sure that we're liked, and that can really make us feel like I especially don't deserve to be here, right? I'm just here because people like me. I'm not smart enough. I'm not good enough, right? So I could talk all day about imposter syndrome but there's just a little teaser for you. I'm going to send along a couple of super easy to read brief articles, really about this idea that like imposter syndrome is really a systemic problem, right? And a cultural problem, to kind of turn that on its head a little bit. So thanks for your time, everyone.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, Holly, about your views in your profession on imposter syndrome, giving us ways to cope, and also sharing with us some wonderful articles. I look forward to reading them. Last but not least, before we get to our Q&A portion of the evening, we have Mr. Emmerich going to talk to us about the financial aspect of grad school. So whenever you're ready, please take it away.
All right, is that showing?
Yes.
Thank you. All right. So just a little bit about myself. I am a small farm community individual who town of 3,000 people was the only stoplight in the county. Came to the big university and had a little bit of an adjustment issue. So when I graduated from college, I went into college administration. And most of that was because of my experience of trying to acclimate to a different environment than what I grew up in. And so all of my career has been in higher education. So I've worked in undergraduate admissions, I've worked in graduate admissions, in both MBA and admissions, medical school admissions, and now in financial aid. And I also teach the freshman transitions course for students coming to the university. And part of that is because it's my intent to help people make that transition and to have a good experience coming to the university, because I think there's so much that the university has to offer, and to help them become acclimated to the university and find that it's a welcoming community, and also a place where I'd like them to help find a community that's that they can feel belonging to. So what I'd like to do, and as I look back at what I put here, I hope this doesn't be discouraging, because it's not supposed to be discouraging, okay? But you can't afford medical school. You can't afford dental school. You can't afford going into a graduate program in health professions. And I'd like to show you different ways that that might be possible for you. So, all right. So costs to get into graduate school, a couple of things to think about. Initially is that you've got fixed costs. So you'll need to take the MCAT or the dental school admission test or the GRE if you're going into a graduate program like chemistry or physical therapy. All require the or psychology. Those graduate programs require the GRE. Then if you're making application to some of those graduate programs, you've got additional costs. Then if you want to send your applications to additional schools, you have those additional costs. So those things all start to add up, and those are even before you start making your applications, or before you even start being admitted to schools. Then you've got additional costs beyond that. So you've got your interviews, what's going to cost to get you to school, the background checks that all come after that. And it may be that you decide at one point, I'm going to wait a year. And there is value to waiting a year. For some people, it might be that you're a non-resident at present, but you would like to become a resident. So you take a year off so you can become a resident of the state of Iowa because you want to come to med school here, for example. So you work for a year, but during that year, then the student loans that you currently have go out of deferment, and you have to start paying on those. So there are trade-offs that you have to make during that period of time. So some things to think about should you decide to do a gap year. Here are just some tuition figures to look at. This is for the programs here at Iowa Now currently, for just a year, for just tuition and fees. Then if you look at what the overall costs would be, so for medical school, for example, although a resident pays $37,000 in tuition and non-resident is $58,000, the overall cost for a year for a doctor is more like 63,000 for a resident and closer to 84,000 for a non-resident. If you're looking at a dentist, a year of tuition is 51,000 for a resident, 76,000 for a non-resident, but it goes up to 71,000 for a resident and closer to 96,000 for a non-resident for dentistry. So you've got those costs. So options available to help you pay. Most programs are going to have scholarships and grants, and that's going to vary by program. So College of Medicine, for example, has over $3 million in scholarships and grants to provide to students that we offer. Over $1 million of that just goes to first-year students alone. Then, of course, there's loans. The interest amount on loans varies from year to year. So current interest rate on unsubsidized loans, which is the Stafford loan, 6.5%. If you go for a plus loan, it's 7.5%. The interest starts to grow once the loan is dispersed. So right off the bat, it starts to grow, but you don't have to start repaying that until 6 months after graduation. And then, of course, there are outside scholarships from organizations, maybe from hometown, from professional organizations, those types of things. But the one thing you will need to do, just like you did for undergrad, is to complete the FAFSA. So every year you'll want to complete the free application for federal student aid. Now there's a change in the FAFSA. Usually we would tell you that you need to make that application by October 1st. They're changing it. They're making the FAFSA a little more streamlined. So it's going from 100 and some questions each year to now closer to 36. But because of that change, we don't know if October 1 if it's going to be available or not. So you want to keep your eye out on the news for whether or not or how soon that's going to be. But regardless of when that comes available, as soon as you have that opportunity, please make sure you do fill that out. So you go to college, you go into a PA program, you go into the dental school, or you go to med school. Here's what you're looking at for an average loan debt when you graduate. I was fortunate that we've got programs that can help you graduate with lower loan debt than what the national average is. And then you see what the average is for nationally for a dental student debt. I didn't have access to what their loan debt is for their Iowa grads. So there are programs available to help you pay for your loans that makes it a little bit easier after you graduate. So there are loan forgiveness programs like the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program that you need to be making payments, 120 payments, so basically over a 10-year period. And if you do that, then they'll forgive the rest of your loan at that point. Pay as you earn or revised pay as you earn. If here's an example of this. So typically, once you graduate, you have like a 10-year payment plan. So an Iowa MBA or an Iowa MD grad has a $175,000 loan debt would probably be paying close to $2,000 a month, which is that's not possible, right? So if you do a pay as you earn loan repayment, it brings it down to closer to $300 to $400 a month payment, with a opportunity to have that loan forgiven after 25 years if you're paying the lower loan rate. So you've got military. If you go into the military, they will help offset your loan debt. You have the national service loan opportunities. So there are different things to look into depending on what type of program you go into, whether it's medicine, dentistry, PA, PT, those types of things. So one of the questions that I was asked to address was what to look for when you're deciding on graduate or professional school. And one of the things I would really encourage you to think about is, what is the reason why you want to pursue the degree program that you're choosing to pursue? There are students every year who come into medical school and they decide sometime during their first year, sometimes second year, that medicine is really not the career they want to pursue. And the question is, why were they pursuing it in the first place? So sometimes they get into it and they realize as they're pursuing in the first year into the second year that, now's the time I realized I didn't want to do it. Some people are pursuing it because that's a family expectation. So make sure that it matches what it is that you truly want to do. So maybe that you need to decide whether an MD or a PA is a better option for you, or maybe it's a nurse practitioner. So really give that a lot of thought. So that would be one thing I would encourage you to think about. When you're looking at programs or which school to go to, which program is most likely to advance your career. So look at things like what is their board exam pass rate? Where do their students get placed for residency? Take a look at those types of things. And then similar to when you looked at undergraduate, where do you feel most comfortable? So please make sure you go and visit the schools. So where are you comfortable with the students that you meet, with the faculty that you meet? So likely you're going to be there for your interview day. So talk with folks there in addition to your interview. Take a look around campus, take a look around the city where the school is located. Do you feel comfortable there? So look at the school, look at the city, look at the community, the whole type of thing. Also consider your support system. If family is really important to you, how close are they? Is it someone, are they going to be able to get close to you, or you get close to them if you just want to get away for a weekend or for a short period of time? What type of resources does the university or does the program have available as far as tutors or counseling services, those types of things? And then when it comes to financial, when you get a financial aid package or a scholarship award, don't just look at the dollar amount. Also take a look at what the overall cost is for living in that environment. We've had students that will say, well, I got a $20,000 scholarship from this institution and you only gave me 10. Take a look then at what it costs to live in that environment versus what it costs to live in Iowa City. So make sure that you're comparing apples to apples and those types of things. What can you do now to prepare for graduate professional school is I'd start looking for outside scholarships and grants. Also think about good spending habits. Take a look now at how you're spending your income now or the money that you've got now, and then work at building some good credit. If you're living like a college student now, that's good. That's a great way to begin. These are some apps maybe to take a look at. Budgeting is sometimes an area that students, some students are really good at it. Other students are not quite as good at. So if you have any issues with budgeting, you might want to take a look at these apps. I think they're really pretty good at helping you put some budgets together. Honeydew is good if you are, if you have a partner or if you have a spouse, then the two of you can do that together. But the rest of them are good ones to maybe consider if you have any issues at all with budgeting. So those are just some things I'd like you to think about. And again, if you have any questions at any point, please feel free to let me know.
Hey, Jeff, if you wouldn't mind, I had messaged Susan to ask if this would be okay. I just want to share a brief example of how like loans and forgiveness has worked for me. And I find myself talking to a lot of students about this. I have tons of student loans, and thankfully I was eligible for federal student loans, some unsubsidized, some subsidized. And was because I have worked for a public university that is considered public service.
Right.
And so college mental health is not where you want to work if you want to make good money. But I have over $115,000 in student loans, and I am 11 months away from that being forgiven. Right. I have worked in public service. I've crossed my T's and dotted my I's, and I've also done income repayments. Right. And so like my first monthly student loan payment was like $70 a month. Right. And as my income inched up, right, my payments have inched up too, no doubt, over the last almost 10 years. But it does work. And I think that system, has worked out a lot of kinks, not all, but it has worked out a lot of kinks. And I am hearing of people having that forgiven. So if public service is something, or some of the other forgiveness programs, something that you see yourself heading toward, like it really is financially possible to have that really scary loan amount just go poof. So just wanted to share, there's a real life example, and I just learned yesterday where I'm at in terms of my calculation, so it's on my mind.
Yeah, we just had someone from the AAMC, so the American Association of Medical Colleges, come in and talk. And there's always some concern because the loan forgiveness, public service loan forgiveness program is a federal program. So there's always concern that maybe it would go away, right? But she said that it's been discussed in 3 different administrations about the possibility of getting rid of it. And there's always been pushback against doing that. And that because it's a student, it's focused on students, that more than likely that should any administration decide try to get rid of it, that it would be people would be grandfathered in. So I think it's a good program. It had issues at first, but those are all I think being ironed out pretty well now, and it does save people. So I think it's good. So thank you actually for that example. It's always good to hear the positives.
Thank you so much for sharing with us about the financial side of financing grad school. I know I've collected some tips to put into my back pocket in preparing for the journey. So thank you. I want to take this time to transition. We have about 12 minutes left, so we made really good time to get some of your questions answered, MAPS members, whether it be about specific things that our panelists talked about, whether you have a question for all the panelists or specific panelists. Now is the time to kind of voice those questions. So maybe we'll give like a minute for everybody to think. I don't want to put everybody on the spot, but maybe at 49, unless somebody has a question right now, we can start raising the questions. I do have one question coming in from the chat. I'll give them a second to type it out. Go ahead and let me know who specifically this question is for, unless it's for everybody, please. And you're welcome to raise your hand as well. Oh, Steph also has a question. So I just got the question in, and then Steph, go ahead and please go next. So my question from the chat is, if I take on student loans before a graduate, or if I take on student loans for a graduate program before medical school, do I need to repay those during or after medical school?
So they would go into deferment while you're back in school. So when you're back in school as a full-time student, then those loans will go into deferment. And you would then, once you graduated from school, then you'd go back into repayment on all your loans together.
Great question. Thank you so much for asking. Steph, I believe you had our next question, and then anybody else who has a question that they want to ask, feel free to put it in the chat, use the raise your hand feature, and we can call on you next.
Yeah, so I guess this is more of like a general question, or for either Jeffrey or Holly. So I was just kind of wondering, when you're in those kind of unsupportive environments, so like maybe there are cliques forming in study environments or something like that, or maybe your professors aren't very welcoming or don't understand your struggles or something, or there are just a lot of different people kind of discouraging you kind of along the way with like studying, or just kind of surrounded by like unsupportive environments while you're going through like pre-health classes and stuff like that, what would you suggest as like some good coping mechanisms for how to deal with that when you're not always close to a support system?
So I'll let Holly think about what her answer might be. My first thought would be recognizing that that is probably always going to be the case. That there are going to be people around you that are not going to be able to see the vision of what you want to accomplish, or to understand the struggles that you're going through. That said, it's a lot easier to forgive reality for being what it is if you go into it with your eyes open, that you're always going to have professors like that, you're always going to have classmates like that. When that's the case, it becomes even more important to try to seek out those people that will be supportive, and lean on them. So it may not be a professor this semester. Maybe the semester it just didn't work out. Do you have one from last semester, that you can go back to and have those conversations with? That was a huge part of my undergrad experience. There were some semesters that I didn't feel like I could really connect with any of the faculty that I had, but I had a research professor from before that I could go and just sit in her office, and kind of talk through my struggles, and she made me feel like I was supported, like I belonged. So um, don't feel like you're stuck with the people that you can see. Realize that you can go beyond that, and go outside of that and look for more people to support you.
Yeah, I echo all of that. I think it is about quality over quantity sometimes. So even if there are 10 people who you feel are invalidating and unsupportive of you, all it takes is 1 or 2 very supportive people to help you manage that and move through that. I think it can be hard to find mentors sometimes. You don't necessarily like go up to someone and say like, hey, will you be my mentor? Right. But look for those people who might be people that you feel emotionally safe with, people that you see being supportive of all students around you, right? Be observers to kind of test the waters of who are those people in your life. And sometimes that can unfold organically, but I think often you have to be intentional. Showing up to spaces where maybe you might find supportive and like-minded individuals. Certainly some sort of mentoring and support has some formality around it. Like I'm a first-gen mentor, for example. And so like there's certain structures and certain systems where you can seek that out and have that support. But I do think often it can happen organically. And then also like look around and see who are the other students maybe who are also feeling that way. There's probably more than just you, right? And so while I don't want to create burden or tax for people by the suggestion, but sometimes if it doesn't exist, then we can build it, or you can build it, right? And you and other students can sometimes build it where it doesn't exist too. And so that's not always possible. But I think there are those people out there. They're just maybe not always the loudest, most obvious voices.
So I see a message here by an anonymous participant. Maybe nobody else can see it. Maybe it just comes to me. I don't know how Zoom works, but they asked what was a determining factor, or the determining factor for what made me choose med school or any other grad program. For me, I chose medical school because I've wanted to be a doctor since I was a little kid. It's that simple. Jeff brought up some phenomenal points that if another program might serve you better or just as well for your goals, but is going to be more cost effective, by all means pursue that, and certainly look at what programs are actually going to help you get to your goals, right? So if it turns out that the role that you want to be a part of matches more a nurse practitioner or a PA, then it doesn't even make sense to go to medical school. Maybe it's more public health facing, so maybe get an MPH, right? Spend some time with doctors to make sure that this is the role that you want to fill. But for me, it ended up coming down to that I value every member of the care team, but that's the role that I wanted to be in. And I just had to realize that financially it's going to be difficult, but I wouldn't have been as happy if I had gone the route of trying to save money and doing a role that I didn't want to do. So
Yeah, and I feel like I just keep saying, I echo Jeffrey and I echo Jeffrey. You know, I already shared that I don't like chemistry, so that is part of where I landed. And I think I did have a bias in my undergrad program of like the more education, the better, right? So like whatever I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go all the way. Right. And I don't regret that, but that wasn't the only way that I could have done it. And I think I could have had a really happy and satisfied career going the social work route or going kind of the professional counselor route where you kind of stop with the masters. You know, I thought a lot about research and teaching, which I love, right? But I like the emotionally focused work that I can do clinically. And I like my job now of being able to help the helpers do their job and start to shift the landscape of mental health. So a lot, I don't know that there was one determining factor. I think I landed where I did for graduate school because I knew that I wanted to be a therapist and I knew that I wanted to do a balance of clinical work and research. And so if anyone ever wants to talk to me about different graduate programs, I'm happy to help with that because some are very research focused and some are more clinical focused, even within the realm of psychology. And it's hard to piece all of that apart. And it wasn't until my like junior year of college that I even knew counseling psychology as a discipline existed. And that is what my degree is in. And then I landed where I landed because they gave me a graduate assistantship and it was cheap. So I could have gone to Loyola in Chicago and had a great time living in Chicago when I was 22, I'm sure. But I went to Muncie, Indiana because they gave me a bunch of money to be there. So there's also some necessity, of course, in how you decide. I am fortunate that given my identities and how I read to the world, that living in a place like Muncie, Indiana wasn't like terribly like unsafe or uncomfortable for me, but it was certainly not where I would want to live long-term or where I recommend other people necessarily live. So I also echo what Jeff had shared about like, make sure you also think about your personal needs as you're navigating, whether that's like the actual program or the place of the program.
Thank you so much. It looks like we have a few minutes left and I have a few more messages coming in with questions. So this one is specifically for Jeffrey. You talked about some programs that help you with studying for the MCAT. Do you have any examples of those or any other tips or resources that you would recommend for any of our members studying for the MCAT exam?
Yeah, I mean, so there are a lot of free resources out there that people above me that had gone before in the process had sent to me. So things like Jack Weston has a site where there are a lot of free daily CARS passages for anybody that's doing MCAT prep, right? Things like the what's the med school HQ or something like that. The guy that does a lot of like he'll interview people that are applying to medical school. He does a whole podcast on that kind of thing. I can't even think of his name. It's been so long, but he's got a lot of YouTube videos and he's got a lot of books and those kinds of things. And so those types of resources were really invaluable. The very poorly named FAP program for being able to afford even paying for the MCAT, which for me at the time was cost prohibitive. So that was a very big deal. So if you think there's any chance at all that you could get some financial assistance applying to medical school, go to the AAMC and apply for the financial assistance program, because that'll save you potentially thousands of dollars, and it doesn't hurt to ask, right? So yeah, Dr. Ryan Gray, there we go. Thank you. I totally forgot his name. Look him up. His podcasts were invaluable, and a surprisingly underutilized resource. I can't believe how many people I basically just echo his advice, and people are like, oh, I've never heard that before. I'm like, oh, well, I guess not enough people are listening to his podcast, because he'll definitely help you write a good personal statement. So
I also have to step away. I'm doing another program at 7 p.m. But I just wanted to share, thank you so much for letting me share space with you all. And I've actually learned things that I will pass along to other students that I work with. So thank you to the other panelists as well. And it was a pleasure to be with y'all this evening.
Pleasure to
you all.
have you. Thank you so much. And I think that's a great time for us to just taper off for the evening. So another wonderful big thank you for all of our panelists. This is an event we decided to host because this is an event that our members wanted to see, and I couldn't be happier with how it went. So I hope everybody learned something, and thank you again.
Yeah, if you guys ever need anything, feel free to reach out to me. I try to make myself available to like I said, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for people that supported me. So if you guys need anything, just let me know, okay?
Me as well. I'd be happy to help.
Thank you all. Have a great rest of your night, and thank you again for being here, everybody.